The iron door didn't just creak. It screamed. Brielle stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, her flashlight cutting through the dark. Rule number 1 at the Hargrove estate: never go below the kitchen. But the burst pipe wasn't going to fix itself, and her job was already hanging by a thread. She swept the beam across the dark. That's when she saw the chains. Heavy iron, bolted to rusted pipe. And attached to those chains, a man. Shirtless, his chest covered in sprawling ink that looked less like art and more like a record of every terrible thing he'd survived. Then he looked up. His eyes didn't ask for help. They measured her. Calculated. Patient in the way only truly dangerous men can be. She knew that face. The whole country did, because 6 months ago, he was on every news channel declared presumed dead. Dante Moretti. The Mafia King. If you don't leave, he rasped, you're already dead. What she didn't know yet was that her employer, the celebrated philanthropist Julian Vane, wasn't just keeping a prisoner. He was keeping a bank, and she had just become the only witness. Above her head, heavy boots hit the floorboards. Once. Twice. Moving toward the basement door. If the monster is in the chains, who is the man coming down the stairs? The boots stopped directly over the basement door. Brielle held her breath until her lungs burned. Her heart was so loud she was certain Dante could hear it from across the room. Then the footsteps retreated toward the kitchen. She exhaled, but the relief didn't last. She was still standing in a room with a ghost, and the ghost was staring at her like she was his next meal. She turned her flashlight back toward the wall. The beam shook. Dante Moretti didn't flinch. Even in chains, he looked like he owned the floor he sat on. She shouldn't have been here. She was supposed to be invisible. For 6 months, that's exactly what Brielle Jordan had been. A ghost in a black and white uniform. She polished silver until it mirrored her tired face. She scrubbed floors until her knees bled. She learned to enter a room without making a sound and leave without being remembered. All of it to pay off a debt that wasn't hers. Her father had been a driver for the wealthy, a quiet, careful man who had made one catastrophic mistake. A calculation error, Julian Vane had called it, his voice smooth as a banker's handshake. Now Brielle was the collateral. Every paycheck she earned flowed directly back into the Vane accounts. Every hour of her labor was his. She was a prisoner, too, just without the chains. "You're shaking, little bird," Dante rasped. The sound of his voice made her skin crawl. It was deep, rough, and carried the particular weight of a man who had ordered deaths with a whisper. "I'm just here for the pipe," Brielle stammered. She pointed her light toward the corner. Water was spraying from a hairline crack in the main line, pooling around Dante's bare feet. That's when she noticed the scars. They weren't from the chains. There were cigarette burns on his shoulders. Pale, circular marks, deliberate and evenly spaced. He hadn't just been captured. He was being taught a lesson, one session at a time. Her stomach turned. Her mother had always called it her pathological empathy. This inability to look away from suffering, even when looking away was the only sensible option. She saw a monster, yes, but she also saw a man in pain. "Don't look at me like that," Dante said, his jaw tightening. "Pity is for the weak. I am merely delayed." "Delayed?" Brielle whispered. "You've been dead to the world for 6 months. "Then the world is wrong," he said. "As it usually is." She almost smiled. She caught herself. "You need to leave," Dante said, his tone shifting. The mocking edge was gone, replaced by something urgent. "Petrov does rounds every 40 minutes. You have maybe 8 left." "Who is Petrov?" "The man whose boots you just heard. He is the reason you want to be upstairs before the next." The door at the top of the stairs opened. She was already out of time. The light from the kitchen spilled down the wooden steps in a long, narrow wedge. "Brielle." Julian Vane's voice floated down from the top of the stairs. It was smooth, expensive sounding. The voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to get what he wanted. "I know you're down here. I saw the kitchen door ajar." Dante's eyes cut to hers. "Hide." Not a request. A command issued in absolute silence. Brielle lunged behind a stack of moth-eaten furniture, pressing her back against the cold, damp wall. She killed her flashlight. The stairs groaned under Vane's weight. Thump, thump, thump. He reached the bottom. He wasn't in his tuxedo jacket anymore. His white sleeves were rolled up. His hands were dark with something that was not grease from the pipes. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't even glance at the burst pipe. He looked at Dante the way a man looks at a safe he hasn't yet opened. Still silent, Vane said. He smiled. It was a cold, empty expression that didn't reach his eyes. I thought 6 months of darkness would make you talkative. Dante didn't look up. He sat like a stone. The only movement was the slow, steady rise and fall of his tattooed chest. I don't talk to dead men, Dante rasped. Vane laughed, a sharp, dry sound that bounced off the concrete. He stepped closer and raised the pistol. Not to fire, just to rest the barrel against Dante's forehead. That's when Brielle's flashlight rolled. She had tucked it under her arm, but her shaking hands let it slip. It hit the concrete floor with a soft, terrible thud. The beam switched on, shooting across the floor and illuminating Vane's expensive leather shoes. Silence swallowed the room. Vane didn't turn around immediately. He looked at the light on his shoes. Brielle, he said softly. I told you never to come down here. Then, from her angle on the floor, she saw it. It had fallen out of Vane's jacket pocket when he laughed. It lay in the shallow puddle by the drain, a small, silver key with a heavy industrial lock head. The key to Dante's chains. Vane began to turn toward her. Come out, he said calmly. Let's not make this unpleasant. She looked at the key. Then she looked at Dante. He had seen it too. His eyes went from the key to her face, and for the first time since she had found him chained in the dark, something moved behind those ice-blue eyes. Not hope. A calculation. Vane took a step toward her hiding spot. I'm counting to 3, Brielle. Dante slammed his shackles against the rusted pipe. The clang was deafening, a thunderclap in the small concrete room. Vane spun, the pistol whipping toward Dante's chest. Shut up! You're losing your touch, Julian, Dante rasped, a bloody smirk splitting his cracked lips. Hunting mice when you should be watching the door. Vane's face darkened. He crossed the room and drove his boot into Dante's ribs with a dull, sickening crack. Brielle flinched. She used the sound. Her fingers closed around the silver key. She shoved it deep into the pocket of her apron, just as Vane's radio crackled. Sir. It was Petrov, his accent like grinding gravel. The guests are asking for the host. And the plumber is at the gate. Vane straightened his tie. He looked at Dante one more time, the look of a man who has decided a problem can wait until morning, and walked toward the stairs. Send the plumber away, Vane said into the radio. I don't need guests in the basement tonight. He climbed the stairs without looking back. The door clicked shut. Silence rushed in. Brielle crawled from behind the crates. Her knees shook so hard she could barely stand. She looked at Dante, who was slumped against the wall, gasping through cracked ribs. She should have run. The service exit was 3 hallways away. Instead, she grabbed a plastic cup from the workbench, filled it with water from the spraying pipe, and walked toward the man in chains. What are you doing? He croaked. You're thirsty, she said. He searched her face for a trap. Then he drank. He drank like a man who hadn't tasted water in days. When the cup was empty, he leaned his head back. You're a fool, little bird. I'm just a maid. No, he said, his eyes sharpening. You're not. By giving me that water, you've made yourself a target. Petrov is already looking for a reason. Then she heard it. The faint click of the basement lock turning from the outside. If she doesn't hide the key in the next 3 seconds, she's the next person in chains. The lock clicked. The door swung open. It was Petrov. He filled the doorway like a wall, his eyes doing a slow, methodical sweep of the room. He walked to the burst pipe. He looked at the puddle on the floor. His gaze settled on the empty plastic cup. Brielle was pressed against the concrete, barely breathing. The maid, Petrov said into his shoulder mic, she's not in the kitchen. Find her. He turned and walked out. Brielle didn't wait. She took the back service stairs, moving fast and quiet, reaching the kitchen just as the intercom buzzed. All staff to the grand hall. Now. She smoothed her apron, wiped her hands on her hem. walked into the hall. The other maids and servers were already lined up, confused, tired, frightened in that low-grade way that came from working in a house where the rules kept changing. Julian Vane stood at the front of the room. Petrov stood beside him, holding a high-powered flashlight. Someone was in the restricted wing, Vane said. His voice was too quiet. That was always the warning sign. The basement floor is wet concrete and mud. It leaves a mark. Brielle looked at her shoes. Gray, chalky dust. Unmistakable. Petrov began moving down the line. The flashlight beam hit the floor in front of each person. Click. Shine. Move. The first maid. Clean. The second server. Clean. 3 people away. Brielle looked at the mop bucket by the station. She looked at the soapy gray water inside it. Click. Shine. Move. 2 people away. She let her hip catch the bucket handle. It went over with a crash, gray water exploding across the floor, soaking her shoes and her hem in one clean sweep. Clumsy girl. Petrov roared, jumping back to save his boots. I'm so sorry, Brielle cried, her voice shaking with genuine fear. I tripped, I'm sorry. Vane walked over slowly. He looked at the mess. He looked at her. Then he reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her face up. You're the driver's daughter, he said quietly. The one with the debt. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he released her and turned to Petrov. Search her room. If you find anything from that basement, kill her. What they didn't know was that the key wasn't in her room. It was taped to the inside of her thigh, the cold metal biting into her skin with every step. Brielle didn't go to her room. She went back to the basement. When she reached Dante, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, tracking the sound of boots on the floor above. Vane is tightening the perimeter, he said the moment she appeared. That means my men are getting close. He's panicking. What do I do? Brielle asked. There's a signal jammer in the attic, Dante said. As long as it's running, my men can't track my location. You have to kill it. The attic has guards at every. Not in the vents. She looked at the rectangular grate near the floor. Narrow. Filthy. Dark. She unscrewed it with a butter knife from the kitchen. She squeezed her body into the cold metal shaft. It was a world of dust and spiders. Every movement she made sounded enormous in the silence. She climbed, her fingers raw, until she dropped through a ceiling panel into the laundry room. The door swung open immediately. A guard walked in carrying a bundle of white sheets stained with deep rust-colored blood. He dropped them by the industrial dryer, reached for his holster, and looked directly at her. Brielle grabbed a bottle of bleach off the shelf. She straightened her spine. She arranged her face into the expression of profound, practiced boredom she had spent 6 months perfecting. Just doing the 2 a.m. bleach run, she said. Mr. Vane wants those stains gone before morning. The guard looked at the blood, looked at her uniform, looked away with a grimace. Hurry up, he said and left. Brielle exhaled. She climbed back into the vent and pushed toward the attic. The jammer was a black box with a pulsing red eye. She found the main data cable, thick, rubber-coated, and positioned the wire cutters she had grabbed from the maintenance shelf. If she cuts this, the silent alarm triggers. If she doesn't, Dante dies in the dark. She squeezed. The cable snapped. The red light died. She tumbled back into the basement, gasping. It's done, she whispered, grabbing the bars. The jammer is down. Dante looked at her. His expression wasn't relief. It was something she couldn't name, something that sat between gratitude and guilt. Why are you really doing this? He asked quietly. To help you. To help myself. You think your father owed a gambling debt, he said. His voice had changed. The commanding edge was gone. What replaced it was worse, it was honesty. You think you're here by accident. Brielle felt the air shift. My father was a good man. Your father was my driver, Dante said. He was the only person in the world who knew where I was hiding the night Vane's men came for me. The silence that followed was absolute. He sold you out, Brielle whispered. He didn't do it for money. Dante leaned forward as far as his chains would allow. Vane had you, Brielle. You were already in this house. Your father was told that if he gave Vane my location, you would be released, the debt cleared. If he refused, you would disappear. Brielle couldn't breathe. He chose you, Dante said, without hesitation. Then why am I still here? She asked, her voice breaking. Why is the debt still? Why am I still? Because Vane lied, Dante said simply. He took what your father offered and kept you anyway. He needed the leverage. The grief hit her in a slow, terrible wave. Her father, the man who had tucked her in, who had hummed old songs while he drove the wealthy through their gilded lives, who had made one desperate choice in the dark, had tried to save her. And it hadn't been enough. She pressed her back against the cold wall and slid down it until she was sitting on the concrete floor, knees pulled to her chest. Dante waited. He didn't try to fix it. He just let her feel it. After a long moment, he spoke again. I need to tell you one more thing, he said. And I need you to hear it clearly. She looked up. I knew about you before you found me. Vane used the same domestic staffing company I own as a front. When he placed you here, your file came across my network. I knew who you were. I knew about your father. And I knew that eventually Vane's cruelty would push you past the point of fear. The words landed like stones in still water. You were waiting for me, she said. I was hoping for you, he corrected. There's a difference. She stared at him. I'm still a pawn. You were, he said. You stopped being one when you gave me water. Before she could answer, a voice came from the doorway. What a touching reunion. Julian Vane stepped into the light. Vane looked calm. That was the most frightening thing about him. The absolute, unhurried calm of a man who had already decided how this ended. He looked at Brielle. Then at the empty space on the attic cable box feed on his tablet screen. I wondered why the driver's daughter was so interested in my infrastructure, he said. He crossed the room and gripped her hair, forcing her head back. Your father died to save you, Vane said softly. It's a shame he wasted the effort. He turned to Petrov, who stood behind him holding a second set of shackles. Chain her to the opposite wall, Vane said. My men are pulling out. We're done here. Petrov's hands were like stone. He slammed Brielle against the weeping wall, and the iron shackles closed around her wrists with two flat, definitive clicks. She was chained directly across from Dante. 10 feet of cold air between them. Vane walked to the center of the room. He knelt and placed a small black device against the main gas line. An orange light began to blink. The insurance on this estate is worth more than Dante's codes, Vane said. He sounded almost bored. The philanthropist loses his home in a tragic gas fire. The world mourns. And every secret in this basement becomes ash. You're a coward, Julian, Dante said. His voice was perfectly steady. You can't win, so you flip the table. I don't need to win, Vane replied. I just need to not lose. He tapped a code into the device. The orange light turned red. Then he walked to Brielle. He leaned in close, expensive cologne, and the rot of the basement mixed together. Your father's debt is officially settled, he whispered. Consider this your final paycheck. He turned and walked up the stairs. Petrov followed. The heavy iron door slammed shut. Clunk. The silence that rushed back in was the worst sound Brielle had ever heard. The device on the gas line beeped. Steady. Patient. Brielle pulled against her chains immediately. The rusted pipe groaned. The metal bit into her skin. Blood slicked her wrists. It's no use, Dante said. There has to be something, she screamed. You're supposed to have a plan. My plan was to get the signal out, he said. He was staring at the ceiling, listening. My men are coming. But the question is whether they arrive before that line blows. Brielle looked at the bomb. She looked at her chains. She looked at the blood on her wrists. Then she opened her right hand. During the struggle with Petrov, she hadn't let go. The master key, the one she had lifted off Petrov's tactical belt in the grand hall when she kicked the mop bucket, when he jumped back and she was nothing but a clumsy, invisible maid, sat in her palm. She had been playing them from the moment they lined her up. Dante, she said quietly. He looked at her hand. For one full second, the Mafia King said nothing. Then, do it. Her fingers moved fast. Click. The left shackle fell. Click. The right shackle hit the floor. Brielle stood up. She crossed the room and drove the key into Dante's wrist locks. Click, click. The chains that had held him for 6 months dropped to the concrete with a sound like an exhale. Dante stood. He unfolded slowly, to his full height, and the man who rose from those chains was not the same man who had been chained in them. The prisoner was gone. What stood in his place was something older and more dangerous. Above them, the first lick of fire caught the floorboards. Black smoke began curling under the iron door, tasting like plastic and poison. "Get behind me," Dante said. "Dante, the door. Behind me. Now." He grabbed her and spun her behind his frame, just as the gas line blew. The world turned orange. The blast threw them both against the far wall. The ceiling groaned. A beam came down in a shower of sparks. Then, through the ringing in Brielle's ears, she heard a new sound. Not the fire. The iron door being blown off its hinges from the outside. The smoke was a thick black curtain. Brielle couldn't see her hands. Her lungs were on fire. She heard boots, multiple sets, fast and coordinated, and the particular silence of armed men moving with purpose. A hand gripped hers. Dante pulled her up. 2 figures stepped through the haze, rifles raised. "Target spotted," one yelled. Dante moved. He had no weapon. He didn't need one. He disarmed the first guard before the man registered the motion. One sharp pivot, a crack of elbow against jaw, and used the body as a shield against the second. Brielle saw it in fragments through the smoke, the way you see lightning, not continuous, just bright, terrible moments. Both men were on the floor in seconds. "Stay close," Dante said. He scooped a fallen rifle off the ground and pressed it into her hands. "You know how to use this? Point and don't miss," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. Close enough. They moved through the burning hallway. Beams fell from the ceiling in slow, graceful arcs of orange light. The grand staircase was already fully engaged. They took the service stairs, the same stairs Brielle had used 100 times in the dark with her cleaning cart, and they reached the foyer. Julian Vane was there. He was cramming stacks of cash into a leather bag with the frantic energy of a man who had just realized his plan had a catastrophic flaw. He looked up, and his face went the color of old ash. "Dante," he started. The front doors exploded inward. A dozen men in black tactical gear swarmed the room. They moved like a single organism, clearing corners, securing exits, and when they found Dante standing in the burning foyer covered in soot and blood, the one at the front, a tall man with a scar along his jaw, stopped and said nothing for a moment. "Boss," Matteo said finally. His voice was rough. "You look terrible." "You're late," Dante replied. Vane dropped the bag. His knees hit the marble. "Dante, please." His voice had lost every drop of its expensive smoothness. He sounded like what he actually was, a frightened man in an expensive suit. "I'll give you everything back. The accounts, double the investments, whatever you..." Dante looked at Brielle. He looked at the chain marks on her wrists, the soot on her face, the blood she was still losing. He looked back at Vane for a long time without speaking. "The debt," Dante said finally, "is settled." He turned away. His men dragged Vane into the dark. Outside, the rain came down cold and clean. The burning mansion lit the grounds in shades of amber and gold. A fleet of black SUVs sat idling on the lawn, their engines a low, steady rumble. Dante's men moved efficiently around them, organized and quiet. Brielle stood at the edge of the driveway. The rain hit her face and she let it. 6 months. 6 months of polishing silver and scrubbing floors, and being nobody in a house built on other people's suffering. 6 months of believing she owed a debt that was never hers to pay, while the man who manufactured that debt kept her father's sacrifice buried in a lie. She thought of her father, the choice he made in the dark, the fact that he made it without hesitation. "He chose you." She pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed through it. Dante came to stand beside her. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at the burning house the way people look at things that needed to end. Then he reached out and gently turned her hands over, looking at the raw marks on her wrists where the chains had been. "Your father's ledger is burned," he said quietly. Every record Vane kept of that debt. Gone. He looked at her. You are a free woman, Brielle Jordan. Whatever you do next, it belongs entirely to you. Brielle looked at the road beyond the iron gates. She could walk out of them right now. She could go back to being invisible, to a life nobody could touch because nobody was looking. She knew how to disappear. She had been practicing for years. Dante opened the car door. Or, he said, his dark eyes finding hers through the rain, you stay. I don't trust easily. I don't trust often. But I trust the woman who gave water to a monster in the dark, and then picked the lock to set him free. Brielle looked at the burning mansion one last time. She thought about all the things she had lost in it. Then she thought about what she had found. She took his hand. She got in the car. 3 years later, Julian Vane is serving consecutive federal sentences for racketeering, fraud, and the murder of a government witness. He will not see the outside of a cell for the rest of his life. The Hargrove estate burned to its foundation. The official report listed the cause as a gas line failure. Brielle Jordan no longer scrubs floors. She no longer fades into the background of other people's lives. She moves through the world with the particular quiet confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she is capable of, because she has already been tested at the absolute worst and come through it holding the key. As for Dante Moretti, the world still whispers his name in back rooms and boardrooms. They still cross the street when they see his men coming. But there is one thing the world does not know. The most dangerous man in the country keeps a single photograph on the desk in his private study. It is not a trophy or a reminder of power. It is a small, slightly out-of-focus picture of a woman standing in the rain outside a burning house, her face tilted up, eyes closed. The night she stopped being invisible. The world feared the man who had been in the chains. But the man in the chains only feared one thing, losing the woman who had held the key.